Her hand cracked against my cheek so hard that I tasted blood. The chandelier above us swayed, throwing light across the glass of champagne that had just spilled onto my carpet. My own son stood there silent, watching his wife hit me in my own living room. My name is Marjorie Ellison. I'm 64 years old, and my daughter-in-law slapped me because I refused to pay $40,000 for her luxury birthday party. My son nodded in agreement, but what they didn't know was... Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Because what happened that night didn't just break my heart, it woke me up. You think you know your own child, the one you raised with every ounce of strength you had. But sometimes, it's the people sitting at your dinner table who are sharpening the knife. I used to believe silence was a form of peace, that if you stayed quiet long enough, people would come to their senses. But I learned too late that silence only teaches the cruel how to get away with more. I wasn't always the woman who got slapped in her own living room. Once I was the head nurse in the ICU at Larkspur County Hospital. Someone people trusted when every second counted. I ran codes, stopped bleeds, stitched wounds, and comforted families who had just lost everything. My shifts blurred into one another, days and nights, mixing under the harsh white light of the hospital. I loved that chaos, the rhythm of machines, and the sharp scent of antiseptic. It was control, purpose, and order. My husband Michael used to say I was built from steel and caffeine. He was a soft-spoken man, a journeyman electrician with rough hands and kind eyes. When he laughed, his shoulders would shake like he couldn't hold all that joy inside. We met when he came to fix the ICU's flickering lights. He said, "You keep hearts beating, I just keep the lights on, so you can see what you're doing." We married a year later and bought the little cedar house on the hill, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a kitchen that always smelled like fresh bread. When Ethan was born, Michael held him like he was holding the entire world. I remember the first night home, the way Ethan's tiny fingers gripped Michael's pinky. "He's got your stubbornness already," Michael had whispered, laughing softly. For years, life was good hard, but good. I worked nights. Michael worked days. We crossed paths at the kitchen table over lukewarm coffee and bills that never seemed to stop coming. We joked that our marriage existed mostly through Post-it notes left on the fridge. But there was love, the kind that's steady, practical, not the stuff of movies, but of people who refused to quit. Then when Ethan was 10, Michael died. A transformer blew at the construction site. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I remember standing at the hospital, my own hospital, staring at a white sheet that covered his face. The air smelled like metal and ozone. My knees didn't buckle, they locked. People said, "You're so strong." But it wasn't strength. It was shock turned to survival. After that, everything was about Ethan. He was all I had left, and I made him my purpose. I picked up extra shifts, took private patients, anything to keep us afloat. I sold Michael's truck to pay off the funeral, canceled every luxury. I remember wrapping Ethan's Christmas presents in brown paper bags that year because I couldn't afford fancy wrapping paper. He never complained. He just hugged me and said, "You're the best mom." I lived off that sentence for years. Ethan grew up kind, but fragile too, sheltered by my protection. I realize that now. I never made him work for anything because I was terrified he'd suffer like I did. When he wanted to quit his first job after college, because the boss didn't appreciate him, I told him to follow his passion instead of teaching him to stay and endure. When he got into debt, trying to start a business, I dipped into my retirement fund. "It's just money," I said. "We'll rebuild." I didn't know then that I was teaching him that love meant rescue. When he met Maddie, I thought she was just another chapter, a learning experience. She came from money, or at least she acted like she did: perfect hair, manicured nails, designer, everything. Her smile was bright, but never reached her eyes. She called me Marge instead of Mom, which didn't bother me at first. But later it started to sound like an insult, clipped and sharp. They married fast, too fast. I remember sitting at the reception in the rented vineyard while Maddie's friends posted every second of it online. The hashtag was #Maddie and Ethan forever. She had her phone out during their first dance, angling for the best shot. I caught Michael's sister shaking her head quietly. I pretended not to notice. At first, Maddie was polite, even sweet. She'd come by with scented candles and cupcakes from her favorite bakery. She'd say things like, "You work too hard, Marge. You should let us take care of you." And I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that maybe I'd finally have a daughter. But it started with small things. Ethan asking for a temporary loan because Maddie wanted to start an online boutique. Then came the emergencies, car, repairs, credit cards, renovations. I wrote check after check because it felt like love. But love without boundaries turns into a leash. One night I came home from a double shift and found Ethan sitting in my kitchen, eyes red. Maddie had maxed out their joint account on a luxury photo shoot for branding, and now they couldn't make the mortgage payment. "Just a little help, Mom," he said. I handed him the money without a word. But that night, alone in bed, I felt something crack inside me. When I retired at 62, they insisted I move in with them. "It'll be easier," Ethan said. "We'll take care of you." I sold my house, my little cedar house, and used most of the money to pay off their debt. I told myself it was for family. I told myself it was the right thing. The first few months were fine. Maddie turned my old furniture into vintage decor for her home office. I cooked dinner every night. They smiled and said thank you. But slowly things shifted. Maddie began commenting on my clothes, my habits, my outdated views. She'd roll her eyes when I asked her to lower her voice during her influencer live streams. Ethan started avoiding confrontation altogether. "She's just stressed," he'd say. I remember one particular evening. It was Maddie's birthday dinner at home. I had baked her a lemon cake from scratch, her favorite, and decorated the dining room with candles. She barely looked up from her phone. When I placed the cake in front of her, she blew out the candles and said, "Cute. But next year, let's do something more elevated, okay?" I laughed politely, but inside I felt that sting, the quiet kind that doesn't bleed but burns. It wasn't until months later that she brought up the idea of her luxury birthday gala. $40,000 for venue photography and partnerships, she said, as if it were a business venture instead of a party. When I said no, she didn't just get angry, she became cruel. She mocked my career, said, "All those years wiping old people's mouths, and you can't even celebrate family." That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the rain sliding down the glass, and for the first time in years I felt afraid of my own home. I didn't know it then, but that fear would turn into something sharper, something that would save me. I started noticing little things after that. Subtle, quiet shifts that most people would dismiss, but I'd spent 40 years in hospitals, reading micro-expressions and silence between words. That's what nurses do. We hear what people don't say. It began with my mail. One week, I didn't receive my pension statement. The next, my bank notifications stopped arriving. When I checked with the post office, they said my address had been updated. Updated to their house address, the one I lived in, but didn't legally own. Maddie brushed it off. "I just thought it'd be easier if everything came here," she said, her voice honey-sweet. I told myself it was harmless, but deep down my gut twisted. Years in the ICU had taught me one thing. Tiny irregularities always precede a crisis. Then came the credit card statement, a charge for a resort in Arizona, another for a $1 or $200 handbag, and the kicker, a withdrawal for $5,000 in cash. When I confronted Ethan, he looked sheepish but unbothered. "It's fine, Mom. We'll pay it back." But they never did. One Sunday afternoon, Maddie came home with shopping bags and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She kissed Ethan on the cheek, ignored me, and said, "By the way, babe, I told the decorator we'll expand the patio. I want an outdoor lounge before the summer collapse." I looked up from my crossword puzzle. "With what money?" She laughed that awful, high-pitched influencer laugh. "Relax, Marge. Money isn't a problem when you know how to leverage assets." Ethan looked away. I realized then that I was the asset. The living, breathing ATM machine, whose years of sacrifice had become their lifestyle fund. Every dinner, every laugh, every compliment, everything was a transaction. But old nurses don't die. They document. So I started taking notes. Dates, receipts, overheard conversations. I wasn't sure yet what I was building toward, but instinct told me to prepare. I hid a small notebook inside an old recipe binder Maddie never touched. A week later, Cora Jenkins, my 70-year-old neighbor from across the street, dropped by with a basket of muffins. Cora was blunt in a way only women who've buried husbands and paid off their mortgages alone can be. "You look tired, Marge," she said, squinting at me over her glasses. The kind of tired that isn't from bad sleep. I hesitated, then told her about the credit cards, the missing mail, the tension. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Honey, you can't heal people who feed off your pulse. You've spent your life saving others. Maybe it's time to save yourself. Her words sat heavy in my chest for days. That week, Ethan borrowed another $10,000 for business investment. I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly visited the bank downtown, the one where I still had my private account. Samir Patel, the branch manager, had known me since the days when I used to cash overtime checks in scrubs. He frowned when I explained the situation. "Mrs. Ellison, your joint account with Ethan has full withdrawal rights. If he decides to drain it, there's nothing we can do without a legal freeze." My stomach dropped. A legal freeze. "Yes," he said, "but only you can initiate it if you act before he does." That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, like the air before a storm. I walked downstairs for water and stopped when I heard voices from the living room. Maddie's voice. 6 months, Ethan. That's all we need. Once her name's off the deed, we can refinance and flip this place. Flip. She said it like I was drywall. Ethan sighed. She'll never agree to that. She's not stupid. Maddie scoffed. Then we make her look stupid. Dr. Hensley owes you a favor, right? Get him to sign something about memory issues or cognitive decline. He doesn't have to lie, just interpret. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop the gasp. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it echo in my ears. They were planning to declare me mentally incompetent, to erase me legally so they could take everything. I stood there in the dark hallway realizing this was no longer just about money. It was about survival. The next morning I called Dr. Ruth Delgado, an old colleague turned psychiatrist. She answered in her calm, precise voice. "Marjorie, it's been too long." I told her everything. Every detail. She listened quietly, then said, "I can help you. We'll document your mental competence, officially sign notarized medical grade proof. If they try anything, you'll have evidence." That afternoon I met her in her office. She ran tests, asked questions, and by the end, she handed me a sealed envelope. "This," she said, "is your shield." When I returned home, I acted. I transferred my remaining savings to a trust account. Samir helped set it up under my name only. I withdrew just enough cash to cover a few months of rent. Then I made one more call to Dennis O'Neill, a lawyer who'd once been my patient after a heart attack. "Marjorie," he said, his tone shifting from polite to serious, as soon as he heard my voice tell me everything from the beginning. By the time we finished, he had a plan. First, transfer the house before they realize it. Make it clean, notarized, and dated before the confrontation. I'll prepare the paperwork. You'll need a buyer you trust. That's how I met Felicity Monroe, a real estate investor who handled properties for her retirement clients. She bought the house quietly in cash with a clause allowing me to stay until transfer of possession 6 months later. No one suspected a thing. I continued living as usual, smiling through dinners, nodding at Maddie's passive-aggressive comments, pretending to be oblivious. When she mocked my outdated habits, like keeping handwritten ledgers, I only smiled. She didn't know I'd started recording her every insult on a small voice recorder hidden inside my knitting basket. Ethan noticed my quietness and mistook it for weakness. "Mom, are you feeling okay lately?" he asked one evening. "You've been forgetting things." I smiled. "Maybe I am, sweetheart. Old age, you know." He looked relieved. That's when I knew the performance was working. Weeks passed. The day before the infamous slap, Maddie posted a story online. "Luxury takes courage and cash." I knew what was coming. She was about to ask for money again. I rehearsed my answer in my head, no. The next evening, when she demanded the $40,000 for her brand party, I stayed calm. When she slapped me, I didn't cry. I just looked at her and saw the ending of a story I'd been too afraid to close. She thought that slap was victory, but what she didn't know was that the deed had already changed hands. My accounts were already locked. My lawyer already had the files. And the woman she thought she could humiliate was about to become her reckoning. That night, while they whispered downstairs planning how to handle me, I sat in my room staring at the envelope Dr. Delgado had given me, the one proving I was perfectly sound of mind. The next morning, I started packing my bags. Each folded shirt felt like an ending. Each zipped compartment a new beginning. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror, the faint outline of a handprint still red on my cheek. But behind it, my eyes were clear, steady, and unafraid. They had built a life on my silence. Now I was done being quiet. The morning I left the house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that carries weight like a body before the first incision. I took one last look at the kitchen, the space that had once smelled like Michael's pancakes and burnt coffee, and whispered a goodbye he would have understood. We did what we could. I left a note for Ethan on the counter. Just 3 lines. "Don't look for me. Take care of yourself. The rest you'll understand soon." I didn't slam the door when I left. I closed it gently. Some endings don't need noise. For the first time in years, I breathed air that was entirely my own. My new apartment in Westdale was small, just a one-bedroom above an old bakery, but it was mine. The smell of bread reminded me of Michael, and that alone made it worth every penny. I furnished it with thrift store finds, simple and clean. I painted one wall pale blue, the same color as the ICU scrubs I used to wear. The first few weeks were strange. Freedom, it turned out, was loud. The clock ticked too much. The silence buzzed. I kept expecting to hear Maddie's voice dripping with sarcasm from the next room, or Ethan's footsteps hesitating at my door. But they didn't come. Not for a while. Then the phone calls began. Unknown numbers at first, silence on the other end. Then Ethan's voice, soft trembling. "Mom, why did you leave Maddie's worried? We can fix this." I said nothing. He sighed, the sound of a man who still thought love could be negotiated. "You don't understand, Mom. People are asking questions about the house, about the accounts. Maddie says you might not be thinking clearly." That word again, clearly. Like clarity belonged only to youth and cruelty. I hung up. 2 days later, I got a letter from a law office, Callaway and Trent. They represented Mr. and Mrs. Ellison in matters of guardianship and estate clarification. Translation. They were trying to declare me incompetent. I didn't panic. I simply called Dennis O'Neill. "They've made their move," I told him. "Good," he said. "Now we play." We filed a preemptive injunction citing mental competence supported by Dr. Delgado's report and notarized proof of financial transactions. Dennis's voice was steady, almost amused. "They don't know you've already set the table before they arrive for dinner." Meanwhile, I started attending a local art class at the community center. At first it felt absurd, a retired ICU nurse surrounded by easels and watercolor palettes. But the act of creating something that didn't serve anyone but myself felt revolutionary. Cora joined me, sometimes knitting in the corner, throwing in dry comments like, "Paint a snake, Marge. You've earned it." It wasn't long before I learned that Maddie had gone public. One evening, Joanne, one of my classmates, showed me Maddie's Instagram story. "Hatchet care for our elders," it read. There was a picture of Maddie looking tearful, her makeup perfect. The caption said, "Watching dementia take someone you love is heartbreaking. Please be patient with your parents." I stared at the screen at the comments flooding in heart emojis, messages of sympathy. "She's so strong. Poor woman dealing with that." I felt my pulse rise, but I didn't comment. I didn't text. I didn't fight in the open. Instead, I screenshotted everything. When you've spent decades charting every medication, every symptom, every vital sign, you learn the power of records. Truth, like medicine, works best when properly documented. Maddie began spreading rumors to my old colleagues. One of them, a nurse I'd trained years ago, called me discreetly. "Marge, are you okay? People are saying you wandered off during a checkup last month." I laughed, not bitterly, but softly. Of course they are. By then, Ethan had stopped calling and started showing up. The first time he knocked, I didn't answer. The second time, he left flowers on the doorstep, cheap carnations wilted by morning. The third time, he shouted through the door, "Mom, Maddie's right. You're being manipulated. That lawyer's taking advantage of you." His words stung not because I believed them, but because I could hear the fear underneath. Maddie had him cornered financially and emotionally. She always had. The day after that, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a video Maddie in their living room crying. Ethan's voice off camera saying, "We'll get her the help she needs." The caption read, "Sometimes love means intervention." That's when I realized this wasn't just a personal war, it was a performance. Maddie wasn't just trying to destroy me, she was building content from it, turning cruelty into clicks. But I'd been in rooms where people screamed for their lives. A phone screen couldn't scare me. I forwarded the video to Dennis. He wrote back 2 words, "Perfect evidence." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Paige, the investigator Dennis hired, was quietly gathering digital records. IP, logs, timestamps, bank activity. Every dollar Maddie had spent from my accounts was being traced. Every purchase cross-checked with security footage. By the time their legal filing reached court, we were ready. But Ethan and Maddie didn't know that. They thought I was old, alone, scared. They had no idea I'd spent my life organizing chaos. When you've run an ICU, you don't crumble under pressure, you stabilize then operate. And now I was ready for surgery. The hearing was set for early September, a crisp morning that smelled faintly of rain and burnt coffee. I remember sitting in Dennis O'Neill's office a week before, surrounded by file folders labeled in his precise handwriting. Transactions. Medical. Witnesses. Digital proof. He slid one folder toward me. Marge, they'll come hard. They'll talk about confusion, frailty, maybe even manipulation. Don't react. Just listen. Let the evidence do the talking. I've been listening my whole life, I said quietly. Maybe that's the problem. He smiled. Then it's time to let silence speak for you. 2 days before court, Maddie showed up at my apartment. I opened the door just enough for her to see the chain still hooked. Her perfume hit me, first sweet synthetic, suffocating. Marge, she said with fake warmth, we don't have to make this ugly. Ethan's heartbroken. You're confused, but we can fix this. I tilted my head. Confused? She gave a pitying smile. I mean, it's understandable. At your age, memory slips happen. We just want to help manage your finances so you can throw another luxury gala, I cut in. Her jaw tightened. Wow, I didn't think you'd be this ungrateful after everything we've done for you. Ungrateful, I said, keeping my tone calm. You mean after housing me in my own home, spending my savings, or calling me senile online? Her eyes flashed for a moment, then she leaned closer. You don't have proof, she hissed. I smiled slow and cold. Are you sure about that? She blinked just once, and for the first time I saw fear replace arrogance. She turned on her heel and stormed off. I watched her car pull away the red taillights, vanishing into the night, and whispered, See you in court. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse buzzed like a hive. Ethan sat beside Maddie, pale and tense, while she scrolled through her phone as if none of this mattered. Her lawyer, Calloway, smirked when he saw me walk in small, gray-haired steady. He didn't realize that every file in my arms was a loaded weapon. When the judge, a stern man named Reeves, called the case, Calloway went first. He painted a picture of a vulnerable senior being exploited by predatory legal counsel. He called me confused, paranoid, and emotionally unstable. I said nothing. Then Dennis stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He placed a series of exhibits on the table one by one like a surgeon laying out instruments. Exhibit A, he said. A notarized psychological evaluation by Dr. Ruth Delgado, confirming Mrs. Ellison's full mental competence, dated before any alleged confusion. The judge nodded. Exhibit B, deed, transfer of property completed and filed 6 months prior to any dispute with full legal and medical verification. Calloway's smirk faltered. Exhibit C. Dennis pressed play on a small tablet. The courtroom speakers filled with sound, Maddie's voice sharp and clear. 6 months, Ethan, that's all we need. Once her name's off the deed, we can flip this place. A ripple went through the room. Maddie froze, her manicured hands tightening into fists. Ethan's eyes darted toward her, panic dawning. Exhibit D. Dennis continued calmly, is a series of financial statements traced to Mrs. Ellison's accounts, funds withdrawn and used by Mrs. Maddie Price Ellison for personal luxury purchases. The transactions occurred while Mrs. Ellison was at home, with phone records, verifying her presence during simultaneous withdrawals. The judge looked over his glasses. You have proof of the locations. Dennis smiled faintly. Yes, Your Honor. GPS data and security camera footage from the ATM. Then came the final blow. Exhibit E. He said a video taken by a neighbor, Ms. Cora Jenkins. The screen showed my living room the moment Maddie's hand struck my face. The sound of the slap cracked through the silence like thunder. The courtroom gasped. Maddie stood abruptly. That video's illegal, she shouted. Dennis didn't flinch. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, Your Honor. The recording is lawful. The judge's voice was quiet but firm. Sit down, Mrs. Ellison. For the next 30 minutes, Maddie unraveled. She denied everything, contradicted herself, blamed Ethan, blamed me, blamed the stress of social media. Ethan tried to speak, but every word made it worse. His voice trembled, his confidence collapsing like a bad foundation. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. My legs felt steady, lighter than they had in months. Your Honor, I said I spent 40 years watching people die because others ignored warning signs. I ignored mine too. I thought love meant staying quiet. But love without respect isn't love. It's leverage. I'm not confused. I'm not lost. I'm done being their source of comfort. Silence. Judge Reeves leaned back. Mrs. Ellison, your statement and the evidence speak for themselves. The petition for guardianship is denied. Property rights and financial control remain solely under your name. Furthermore, I'm ordering a review of potential fraud and coercion by the plaintiffs. Maddie's face went white. Ethan lowered his head into his hands. Dennis gathered the files neatly as if packing up the remains of a war. It's over, he said softly. But I knew better. Wars like this never really end. They just change battlegrounds. As I walked out of the courthouse, the wind caught my hair, lifting a strand across my cheek where the scarlet memory of her slap had once burned. The air smelled like rain again, fresh cleansing. Across the street, Maddie was arguing with Ethan, her voice rising. "You said she'd cave. You said she'd forget." Ethan shouted back, his voice breaking. "She never forgets anything, Maddie. That's the problem." He was right. I didn't forget. I documented, I endured, I survived. And now finally, I was free to live not as someone's mother, not as someone's victim, but as Marjorie Ellison, a woman who remembered everything. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a heavy thud, and for a moment it felt like an entire decade of exhaustion lifted from my shoulders. But victory never feels like you expect it to. It wasn't triumph. It was silence, the kind that comes after a hurricane, when the world is still deciding whether to rebuild or collapse. Dennis walked beside me down the courthouse steps. "You did it, Marge," he said. "You're officially free." Free! Such a small word for such a long fight. But I wasn't done. Not yet. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a new message from Ethan. "Can we talk?" It read. No punctuation, no warmth. Just that simple line. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at the same diner where I used to take him after Little League games, the one with cracked red booths and the smell of frying bacon that never quite leaves your clothes. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with his hands clasped so tightly they were turning white. "Mom," he started, his voice low. I'm sorry." I didn't answer right away. I studied his face, the deep lines that hadn't been there a year ago, the sleepless eyes. He looked smaller somehow, like someone who had been carrying a lie too heavy for too long. "I don't know what to say," he continued. "You were right about everything. Maddie," she took what was left. "The accounts, the car, even the furniture. She's gone. Miami, I think." I sipped my coffee, its bitterness grounding me. "You chose her, Ethan." He nodded. "I know. And I thought I was choosing love. But she made me believe you were against me, that you didn't trust me." "I didn't stop trusting you," I said softly. "I stopped trusting the man you became." He flinched. Silence stretched between us, filled with the clinking of dishes and the low hum of a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Then he whispered I wanted to fix it, but she kept saying it was too late, that we needed to take everything before you turned on us. She was right about one thing I said. It was too late, just not for me. He looked down. I deserved that. I wanted to say something kind, something motherly, but the words didn't come. The truth was sharper and cleaner than sympathy. You deserved to start over. That's punishment enough. When I left the diner, I didn't look back. Some stories need a full stop, not a comma. That evening, I drove to Cedarview Hill, the place where my old house once stood, now freshly painted, new flowers lining the walkway. Felicity Monroe's company had renovated it completely. A different life now filled those walls, one that didn't belong to me anymore. Still, I stood across the street, watching the light flicker through the curtains. It wasn't sadness, I felt. It was closure. I'd built that house with love and hard work, and I'd left it the same way. Not destroyed, just released. My phone buzzed again. It was Dennis. "You might want to see the news," he said. A quick search pulled up Maddie's name trending online. There she was in grainy video footage, arguing in a luxury boutique, screaming about fraudulent charges. The article said she'd been reported for identity theft, using my name to open new credit lines, even after the court ruling. I watched the clip twice. Not for schadenfreude, but for confirmation people like Maddie always implode under the weight of their own lies. The next day, I met with Samir Patel at the bank. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, sliding over a document, "your trust account is officially active. Monthly distributions will begin next week." I signed my hand steady. For the first time, my future wasn't tied to anyone else's choices. When I got home, I unpacked my paints. The light from the window fell across the canvas in golden streaks. I started to paint not flowers, not houses, but hands. Wrinkled, steady, working hands. Mine. I called it Hands That Heal. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away over the years, to patience, to Ethan, to a life of service and silence. Now those hands were creating something new, something that asked for nothing but color and light. A week later, Cora stopped by, leaning on her cane and squinting at the painting. "You finally painted yourself," she said. Maybe I said smiling, or maybe I painted what's left after survival. The world outside felt brighter, louder. I started attending the art class more regularly, even joined Joanne and Alma for coffee afterward. Life didn't return to what it was. It became something better. Small, deliberate, peaceful. Then, one afternoon as I was cleaning brushes, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a delivery man stood there with a small box and a note. From Ethan. Inside was a framed silver, slightly tarnished. It held an old photo me in scrubs holding him as a toddler, both of us covered in chocolate cake from his 2nd birthday. On the back he'd written, "I found this in one of the boxes Maddie left behind. Thought you should have it. I'm working again construction. I'll be okay. I just wanted to say thank you for everything." For the first time in months, I cried not from pain but from release. Later that night, I placed the photo beside the painting and whispered, "This is enough." Outside, the wind rustled through the maple tree near my balcony. I watched the leaves swirl like little reminders that endings are just transitions in disguise. People think revenge is about destruction. It isn't. It's about reclamation, about taking back the parts of yourself you gave to the wrong hands. Mine were steady again, and for the first time in a very long time, I could breathe without the weight of anyone else's expectations. A month after the court hearing, I received an invitation handwritten, delicate and scented, faintly of lavender. It was from the Cedar View Art Council. They wanted to feature my painting, Hands That Heal, in their fall exhibition. I stared at the letter, for a long time, my fingers tracing the embossed seal. After decades of cleaning blood, disinfectant, and despair from my hands, they were finally being seen for what they were capable of: creation, not just repair. At the exhibit, the gallery lights cast a soft glow over the canvases. Mine hung near the entrance, modest but quietly commanding. People stopped to look, some curious, some emotional. A young woman touched the corner of the frame and whispered, "It feels like she's holding on to something invisible." She wasn't wrong. I was holding on to myself. Cora arrived dressed in her best floral scarf. "You did it, Marge," she said, "and you didn't even have to raise your voice." I laughed. Turns out silence makes a better weapon than I thought. As the evening went on, Dennis appeared too, holding a glass of red wine. "There's talk, you know," he said quietly. "Maddie's lawyer, Calloway, is under investigation. Turns out he handled at least 3 fraudulent estate cases tied to the same shell accounts Maddie used." I raised an eyebrow. "Karma working overtime." He chuckled. "More like a good paper trail. You started something, Marge. You exposed a network of abuse that's been operating for years. The state's calling it the Cedar View Guardianship Circle." The words sank in slowly. I hadn't just defended myself. I'd cracked open something larger, something that might protect others who'd been silenced like me. Later that night, I sat by my window, the sound of distant rain tapping against the glass. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." No signature, but I didn't need one. "Maddie." I smiled faintly. The message wasn't a threat, it was confirmation that she was still watching, still losing, still unraveling. I typed a reply, but didn't send it. Instead, I whispered it into the quiet. "You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning, only this time not on your terms." Then I turned my phone face down, reached for my brush, and began another painting. Not of hands this time, but of firelight on glass. How it bends, breaks, and still finds a way to shine. Because revenge, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a life rebuilt so beautifully that those who broke it have no choice but to watch from the dark. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about survival, dignity, and learning when to stop apologizing for your strength. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Marjorie's place? Would you walk away, or would you fight back quietly like she did? And if you've ever rebuilt your life after betrayal, share where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories like ours can travel. This isn't the end, my friend. It's just the next chapter.